Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Layoff Legends podcast, where we come together to listen to layoff stories and bring in relevant expertise with a focus on finding inspiration, encouragement, and guidance for the layoff tech community, and beyond. I'm your host, Leo, a Microsoft L66 PM that was laid off last October. I am delighted to host another episode today with another special guest who I had the privilege of meeting through another podcast guest and realized that we met a very long time ago in Seattle. Dr. Valdesha DeJean, welcome to the Layoff Legends podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Leo. It's so great to be here.
This is awesome. Now, before we jump in, we have a lot of questions prepared for you and for our community. But if you don't mind, I would love to just read your bio and introduce you to the community. Dr. Valdesha DeJean received her medical degree from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. It's her psychiatry residency training at Baylor College of Medicine, Menninger Department of Psychiatry, where she served as the chief resident. She was the first Black female in the adult psychiatry program to receive this recognition. Congratulations.
Thank you.
She received the Rafael Hernandez MD Award for Demonstration of Excellence in Clinical Psychiatry and Related Research from Meharry Medical College. She is also the recipient of the Distinguished Laughlin Fellow Merit Award and has been acknowledged as a Distinguished Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. DeJean has several publications on topics related to dementia, depression, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and personality disorders. She is a co-author of the textbook entitled Professionalism in Psychiatry. She is a public speaker and mental health advocate who is committed to the mission of decreasing stigma and health disparities associated with mental illness by hosting and presenting educational seminars throughout the community. She is currently treating patients in private practice at the Georgia Psychological Treatment Center in Marietta, Georgia, and specializes in the treatment of survivors of trauma, PTSD, and mood disorders. She has a unique focus of working with professionals in crisis. We are so honored to have you. Thank you for joining
We're delighted to be here, and thank you for this wonderful mission that you have. And I just love the way you transmitted your pain into purpose. This is a great thing, and I'm going to be able to use you as a resource for my patients. Go.
I'm honored to hear that. So thank you so much, Dr. DeJean. Okay, let's get into it. You know, we have such a rich community. We have folks that have been laid off recently. We have folks that have been laid off for quite a while and are still job hunting. We have folks that have taken some time off and said, I need to find myself. I need to discover. And there are folks also that are kind of worried, like, oh my gosh, layoffs are happening. Am I next? What am I going to do, etc. And so because of that vast spectrum, would love us to baseline a little bit around mental wellness and what it actually means. And so before we dive into any of the career conversations, could you help our listeners understand when we talk about mental wellness, what does that mean from a clinical perspective?
My definition of mental wellness is the ability to identify, understand, and manage your feeling, and to have resilience over stress. And for some people, it also includes a component of feeling like you're making a contribution to society and that you're resilient.
How does that extend? Because it sounds like that's very basic to people of all walks of life. Is this unique to professionals in crisis, or is it really just everyone in general?
I would say that's for everyone in general.
Mm-hmm.
Professionals in crisis, I would say they have a little bit more vulnerability because a lot of times high-level professionals are so perfectionistic and they really have a hard time managing uncertainty because they're used to feeling in control.
A lot of our listeners, many of these tech companies tend to recruit from very high-profile colleges, universities, professional programs. And so I think that a lot of our listeners are no strangers to pressure, are no strangers to high expectations. So to your point, when uncertainty comes in, it's very destabilizing. There's a difference between how folks like that are always in that pressure cooker deal with uncertainty versus others who really just on a day-to-day, they don't put themselves through the pressure cooker of high achievement. I'm curious, is there a difference there?
You know, that's a good point. I think there are some people that they don't have a whole lot of high standards for themselves. So in some ways, life can be easier, but sometimes those people feel envious. They want more, but they don't know how to achieve more. So they could be a little bit psychologically stuck. But you speak on culture, and I think that's also important. Living in Seattle, I had the opportunity to work with patients from all of these tech companies, from Microsoft, ranging to Google, Facebook, and all. And that culture of expectation and that grind, it can be precarious. I mean, at first, I think people feel like they can handle it because they're used to that high achievement. But I would say everyone has a breaking point. Everyone burns out at some point. When you already have unrelenting standards set for yourself, and then you add that cultural external pressure, it can really, really be destabilizing, as you mentioned, particularly for professionals in crisis.
Well, how does that manifest when you talk about that addition of pressure? Many a times you don't really see it on the outside. You don't have a bandage. You're not limping like an injury. You're not wearing a cast. What does it actually look like when professionals like this face these types of uncertainties?
So sometimes they present very depressed. So you'll see problems with sleep, fatigue, not feeling motivated. They start to isolate. They may not be engaging in activities the same. Sometimes it manifests as anxiety. They worry a lot. Their thoughts are racing so much that they can't sleep throughout the night. They can even have bodily symptoms. So some people, they have these chronic headaches. They've been to the doctor, but they can't find a reason why they're having headaches, or they have upset stomach. A host of somatic physical symptoms can happen. It's a range in which people present.
And is this something that you would know that you're actually experiencing? Because sometimes you may feel stressed, but it's the bad pizza you ate last night. How do you make the connection between, whoa, I see a storm coming, or I'm going through this, and what I'm feeling is as a result of this? How do people make that connection?
That's a really good point, because going back to the mental wellness piece, not everyone is able to feel in touch with their internal world. Some people are in denial. Some people are so addicted to busy that they don't take the time to reflect, to process their emotions. So there are a few people that they would disavow the notion when I bring it to them. Hey, your job is really killing you inside emotionally. Now, there are some people that are aware of it. And I would say that those who really are able to be more resilient are the ones who are better able to kind of process it through and to at least get to the other side of exploring what they're feeling.
There was something you said that I kind of latched onto. You talked about the addiction to busy. And in these types of cultures, we call it shipping. So you have your product, you design it, and you have to release it. And we live in a time where fast is a currency. And the faster you can go and the faster you can learn, the better it is. And, sometimes in some cultures of companies, they celebrate mistake making. Other times they don't. Like, hey, you've got to almost be perfect as you push this forward because you're now competing against certain standards. I'm curious, for folks who are addicted to busy or don't know that they're addicted to busy, how does that present? How would you observe that and say, wow, that person they're too committed to this thing, or they need to let go a little bit? How does that look like?
So sometimes people like that you can see it in the interview. When I interview with them, they're guiding the interview. They're controlling the narrative, or how should I do it? Or they're asking me to give them homework. They're kind of managing the sessions themselves, right? Instead of surrendering kind of to the process of allowing someone to guide. So sometimes you'll see it in this kind of power dynamic and control. Other times, I would say people are just feeling tense. They're feeling a lot of muscle tension. They're just very anxious in their affect when I'm looking at them. And I can tell by the history, like, what's been stressing you out lately? Or, I can tell by what they're talking about all the time. If it's always work, 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 and I don't hear about, well, when's the last time you went out with your husband on a date? Or when's the last time you engaged in hobbies? Then I'm getting a sense that work is dominating too much of their life. And the problem with this group of people is that they don't know how to set boundaries. They don't know how to say no. And then they build self-esteem on this productivity, and their self-worth becomes connected to it until they're too tired. And because they don't know how to say no, they burn out.
Wow, there's so much you said there. It's unpacking. I'm going to come back to the boundaries and building
Yeah.
self-esteem on, your achievements and your accomplishments. And we're going to step through this. And so the importance of self-care, first of all, because you mentioned the need for balance. What does meaningful self-care actually look like? And let's not even talk about the layoff yet. Let's just talk day to day. People are going to work. What does self-care look like?
Some people water down self care and kind of just say, oh, exercise, meditation. But when I think of self care, I think of components. I think of an infrastructure. So there's physical self care, there's emotional self care, there's mental self care, there's spiritual self care, and there's social self care. And
Wow.
so in my own practice, in my life, I'm trying to make sure I'm evaluating and feeding those different areas at all times. In flux, of course, because some days you're going to be better at certain things than others. So yeah, the physical self-care, exercise, okay? But what about emotional, mental? That's what we're talking about, mindset, right?
Mm.
So um, back to what we're talking about, emotions. Have you ever taken the time to recognize those emotions? Are you being honest with yourself? You know, some people hate their jobs, but because their mother and father wanted them to do the job, they're not honest with the fact that they hate it. That's an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of emotional self-care. Mental self-care is like, are you so fixated on the negative things that are happening with this layoff that you don't see what's good in your life? So mental self-care for that person might look like starting a gratitude journal, starting positive affirmations to make sure they're feeding their mind. Because as humans, we are naturally in society inclined to think more negatively because we're inundated with negative material through the media and everything, right? And then there's spiritual self-care. If you're a believer, do you go to places of worship to commune with other people?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're a non-believer, do you commune with nature?
Mm-hmm.
Because research is showing that people who are happier spend more time outdoors. And there's research that says ocean waves, being about the beach, traveling promotes more happiness. So are you doing things that create zest in your life? And then the social self-care would be you connecting. So many people isolate when they're laid off. But are you connecting with the community? Are you connecting with your friends? So many times I hear people say, I'm not going to that gathering because of course they're going to ask me how's work going, and then I'll have to admit that I got laid off. So the isolation becomes a fuel for more anxiety and a backdrop of kind of a auger plate for depression,
And it sounds like with those dimensions that you mentioned, is the goal to find things in each one of those dimensions and practice them on a daily, weekly basis? Do you say, I'm going to do two of these things every day?
Mhm.
How does that work for different people? Or do you just find what works for you?
I think you naturally find what works for you. Some people are so neglectful of themselves that they may actually need to kind of write it down. But some people have some of the other things in flux, right? That's part of their life. And so maybe they need to pay attention to those other areas. I really think it depends on just how much self-deprivation you have.
I was in a gift store recently and I saw these. It can be just, again, it's basic, but when you start to pay attention around, you're like, wait, I've seen those so many times, but it makes a huge difference. Like these little stickers that say gratitude, be grateful. Have you
Mm-hmm.
said hi to someone strange today? Like these very little things that tap you on the shoulder and remind you to be present despite everything that's going on. It's a very healthy way to just like, hey, keep the practice going.
Right.
And it, to a certain extent, it builds, you mentioned earlier, resilience for things that you may face in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you talked about boundaries. So now we are moving into some of this stuff. So when you talk about, I tried to control all of this thing, but this thing has happened that is completely out of my control.
Right.
And now I am reacting. What are some of the healthy ways? Because these are happening to incredibly smart people. They are happening to tall, short, people from all walks of life. And the narrative is changing in the tech community. And it's actually quite comical. We've heard of things like, oh, we have to cut costs. And so we have to eliminate this. Now we're hearing more around performance. We have to remove, low performers. And then there are different terms. We're hearing things like non-regrettable attrition. The narrative is changing. The
Interesting.
person affected is the same. And so I'm curious how folks who have been in control, have been working so hard, and then they receive this devastating news. How are they meant to absorb and deal with that?
That's a good point, because some people feel a sense of betrayal with the layoff, because it's like, I've been loyal to this company. I didn't even take all my vacation last time before I left, I took that extra title without increase in pay. So they feel resentful, and they're in this state of disillusionment, the place where they kind of laid out themselves and sacrificed. It didn't show that loyalty in return. So it can be very devastating. And I feel like you can look at this as, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with life, or you can learn to embrace uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we're all, at some point of our lives, we have to face the fact that we are not going to always know how things unfold. And we have to accept our reality so we can address that reality. So the people who navigate a little bit better with this are those who can embrace uncertainty. And then there's a mindset thing with this boundary. I'm going back to boundaries, where you're saying, what do you do with that? I think the key is to learn the lesson in the pain. So what did I learn about myself in all of this? I learned that I'll never be loyal to the extent of self-sacrifice again. Or maybe you learn what you want in a new work environment. Go forward. And then sometimes this thing is such a blessing in disguise. Sometimes these layoffs are really a setback that's a setup for a comeback. I mean, truly. You've always wanted to write that book, but you were so busy working, you never did it. You wanted to start that business, but your fear of scarcity kept you from doing so. So what is the lesson? What am I learning about myself? And what do I really want? Because it may not be to go back to corporate America. Mm-hmm. It may be the fuel to push you into a new destiny.
Talk about that in this community around pause first. Mm-hmm. And yes, you could, in the anxiety, you can go and start looking for another job and polishing your resume.
Right.
There's power in the pause. I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier around that, the emotion of anger and just betrayal. And let's say a client comes to you day one. I just happened to have my counseling session with you, but I just learned I was laid off, and I just show up today. I didn't want to cancel my session, and I am going through what you just mentioned: anger. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to see anybody on my team, because as we've talked with folks in this podcast, we've seen the spectrum of emotions.
Yes.
How do you start to gently help that person lean in and face this? I mean, we could talk about the long-term plan and things like that, but in that moment, this person's in a lot of pain, a lot of confusion and worry. I'm curious, how would you begin a conversation with them?
So I would start with empathic validation, because a lot of times people are angry and they feel shame about that emotion, or they're wishing they didn't feel that way, or they're feeling guilty that they even feel that way. So I would leave space for that and say, gosh, I know that must hurt. I know that must make you upset. And I remind them the next phase to see it as a grief journey, because it is a loss. It's not a loss of a person that you love, but how much of our lives do we spend at work? So much of it, I haven't quantified it, but it's probably 65, 70% of our lives. So it is a loss. So I normalize that and say, we're going on a grief journey together. And I know right now this is hurting, but you're going to see some beauty in this pain, and you're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. You're not alone in it. And that's kind of the walk we go. We kind of reframe it from a grief perspective, so it gives someone a sense of hope for what the future's going to look like.
I love that term, empathic validation, and really just saying, look, I feel you, I hear you. I'm curious, and we will go through this, but one of the challenges with this experience is how other people participate. You've been laid off. You're now in a fraternity of people that have been laid off too, but you have to find them, because not many people like, hey, I've been laid off. Like it's a very interesting thing that we have to destigmatize, especially as it continues to grow. Then the larger question is some of the others who've been left behind and now worried, hey, am I going to be laid off? And how do I talk to someone that I know has been laid off? So I guess this question is probably for how would you encourage folks who have not been laid off? And how do they relate to people that have been laid off? Because I've seen some, it was like, you just avoid them, like, hey, don't get your layoff juice on me. I don't want any of that. Or they don't know what to say and they just avoid you.
Yeah.
But again, these are the people that you worked with for such a long
Gotta hurt.
time. And that hurts, right? Because you're facing double rejection from the company and from your colleagues. How do colleagues that are still in their roles, how do they approach this, when they see some of their colleagues being laid off?
I wonder if some of that don't bring your layoff juice over here has to do with recognizing your own vulnerability and helplessness in that, and also survivor guilt. I feel guilty that I still am here and you're not, and especially when I know you're smart. So instead of dealing with those emotions, I just kind of run away, So I think the first thing is that to lean into the discomfort, but not avoid and say, I am so sorry that happened. I'm scared myself. And just to really be honest about how you're processing it. I miss you. You didn't deserve it. All the things you probably want to say. The person probably needs to hear that.
Oh, it sounds like there's work on the other side to be done as well. But it's human work. It's soul work. It's not corporate work. And I think that it's interesting too, because to your point earlier around the attachment to the company or the email address, once that email address changes, you're no longer at google.com or at tesla.com. You are now at Gmail. Right. It's a very different vibe and identity, and other folks can either help or hurt that transition for you.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful statement. You mentioned identity. It makes me think about the people in my practice that were able to navigate this successfully versus the ones that weren't. People who over-identified with their job and career. Like, it's a difference to say, I am an engineer versus I work as an engineer. But when your whole identity is like wrapped up into this career, and of course it's a big part of us, it can really put you in a precarious predicament, because then you don't see other sides of yourself, other dimensions of yourself that you can pivot to. So that identity piece is huge in terms of mindset. And even if you once saw yourself as that career, begin to look at explore the other aspects of you, And it's hard to do sometimes, because for me, I knew early on I wanted to be a psychiatrist. Very early. I personally find it to be a calling. So if I had to stop doing it, it would hurt. But there's still so much more to me than that. And I think for the people who can't find those other aspects of who they are and tap into the beauty of the range of who they are, they have a more difficulty with this grief process.
And so where do they start? Do you get a whiteboard or a piece of paper and say, okay, work, I'm a dad, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle. How do you start to identify your identities so that you can start to, okay, great. Now that I'm not this anymore from 9 to 5,
right?
Let me invest in all these other areas. Do you really just break out a piece of paper and start writing?
Sometimes people need that structure. I'm more of a let it flow naturally. So as I get to know them, see their strengths. I had a patient who was laid off, and she didn't really like being an engineer anyway. But one thing about her, she was hilarious. I mean, I would sometimes feel guilty after the sessions. I would laugh literally through the whole session. Oh my God, you need to go to a comedy school. You need to go. So sometimes people can see those beautiful things in you that naturally that you can't see in yourself. Yeah. It's easy to pick up on. Sometimes I have to interview the people who are so unidimensional, which can happen with engineering, right? So sometimes I'll interview their spouses or their family members. What do you see? What else do you think they're good at?
Oh, interesting. So talk to your circle.
Talk to your circle. And then sometimes I ask them to go get feedback from their circle. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way of identifying the other sides. That many times you haven't invested because you've been so focused on the role or the job or the promotion that you don't really take the time to invest in those portions that matter. Okay, this is awesome. Question again, when we talk about circles, social media is big,
Yeah.
and I think that there's a lot of pressure depending on who you are, like Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn especially. And I'm curious, what do you think the role of social media? Let's go LinkedIn.
Okay.
How does that play in mental wellness, especially when it comes to career transitions? Because a lot of people feel compelled. Man, I got to keep my presence up. I've got to update my status, but if I update my status, will people still connect? And so there is an external pressure. I'm curious how folks should think about social media, professional networks like LinkedIn, when it comes to managing a layoff.
Yeah, with everything, there's some good and bad, right? So, social media can be a way to stay informed, way to build and maintain your network, of course. And, certainly you can be informed through that channel. So there's some benefits. But I will say there are a lot of research studies out there now supporting the fact that social media is increasing depression and anxiety in people. And the undercurrent of that is that what they're seeing is that people, whether consciously or unconsciously, we compare ourselves to other people. So if you're already feeling a little bit of a kind of nick in the armor of your self-esteem, and someone else is showing all these beautiful things about their life and stuff like that, it can certainly start to kind of unravel that sense of self-worth. And people don't think about the fact that, of course, people are going to highlight the good things about themselves. Not often people highlight what's bad in their life. And if they do, it's usually after they're on the other side and they've gotten through and they want to give you some type of testimony, right? So people don't put that in perspective. So it's funny you asked that question because I've actually had to prescribe abstinence from social media, as if it was like abstinence from alcohol. So, and some people challenge it like, no, could that be impacting me that way? No, that's not why I'm depressed. I said, okay, well, let's do this. 2 weeks off. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no Instagram, no Facebook. And let's just notice how you feel. So I've actually done that in therapy, and the person comes back so much better. Mood has stabilized and normalized.
I have an interesting relationship with LinkedIn. I heard this term somewhere. It's actually stuck with me, this concept of toxic positivity. But then with layoffs, you start to see more folks post about layoffs. Mm-hmm. Then you also start to see more people posting about jobs too. So folks are being laid off from the same company. Mm-hmm. People are also posting jobs from the same. So you have this cognitive, wait, where is this company? But then you guys just laid off, but then you're also hiring hundreds of people.
Oh, that's gotta hurt. Yeah.
Right. And then so it's like, oh, okay. And this is happening across multiple companies. Oh. And so the social media presence has become a very confusing place. Now the interesting is once you could post, you could find a role, and then you can move on.
Interesting that you don't find that way. And that's the thing. People have to know that there are various ways to apply and to research, right? You can't heal in a place of hurt. So if you're going there and it keeps hurting you, then you have to walk away from that, or at least give some pause. If you find it helpful in some ways, I would say create parameters around it. Okay, I'm going to only do this an hour for a day and then I stop, or I'll do it and I'll do a little mood chart or mood diary, so to speak, and see if I'm tanking, emotionally unraveling after I'm spending time there. And then we kind of shift gears if so.
So what I'm hearing is, first of all, it works, but you've got to be able to manage it, create your boundaries, right?
Right.
Find the role, you'll be able to connect with people who can help you find your next thing, but at the same time, monitor yourself and how you're kind of going through that. It's pretty interesting. As we kind of move forward here, so the experience pre-layoff, the people that have been affected by it, the circle, social media, a lot of folks have talked about this value. So they kind of go in, going through a depression, going through isolation, shame, identity. But then at some point, there's a inflection point. and folks start to rise. Okay, I'm going to start looking for a role. I'm going to start networking again. I'm going to start reaching out to other people. That inflection point there, I'm curious, what tends to happen? Is what aha moment happens in folks where it's like, look, wow, I'm going to move, I'm going to come out of this place and move to a place of initiative and driving and trying to decide what's next. I'm curious for your thoughts there of that shift.
Yes. I will say, with my patients, I kind of see people on opposite ends of the spectrum. So sometimes I see someone come in and they're so overwhelmed with the idea of having to go search for some other job that they are in a state of analysis paralysis. Like they can't do anything. They just sit, they waste the days away. Sometimes weeks and months go by and nothing has really happened. Then you might see someone on the opposite end where they're just gunning it all day long. They're just literally from 8 to midnight going so hard, and the anxiety is through the roof because they are inundated so much that they have not taken the time to do that self-care, to just recharge, And so as we navigate together in therapy, I try to help them to kind of achieve that balance. And so for the ones that are totally avoidant, what we do is take small goals, very, very minute goals. So let's just look at what else is out there. Just go on Indeed and look, see what you see. That's the goal for the week. So sometimes it has to just be a week goal because they can't even handle it in a day because it creates so much anxiety. And usually after maybe 5 or 6 small steps have been taken, then they're able to really gain the momentum. Kind of like some people feel like their mind is supposed to get ready and then they can act. Some people feel like they have to aim before they're shooting, but that's not how it always works. Sometimes you have to shoot, then aim, just so you can get in momentum. So some people really have to be pushed, and then some people have to be slowed down.
That's so interesting. Is there a risk to not stopping? So you got laid off and you're immediately jumping back in. And for many folks, it's financial, it's obligations, etc. Is there a risk in actually not taking a mental break? And whether that break is a day, a weekend, a week, even longer if you can. Curious on the importance of breaking if that is at all necessary.
I think there's a huge risk in not taking a break because it goes back to, did you identify what you're feeling? Have you accepted what you're feeling? Have you even processed what you're feeling? Have you even talked to anyone about what you're feeling? Because then you're operating in that addicted to busy mantra, and sometimes that can lead to impulsivity, self-sabotage.
And you may take that into your next role, which is even riskier. So that I think is really, really important for you to process that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could be in such a rush, you end up right back in another toxic work environment.
Wow. That is so powerful. It's interesting. As we prepare for interviews and stuff, one of these questions, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What's the work environment you thrive in? I see that question in a completely different light now. See it in a completely different light. Because many times these layoffs help you identify what worked and what didn't work. And we have a little bit of an exercise where we ask you, hey, do a little bit of a postmortem, go back and figure out, like, what went wrong? What did you like? It was the layoff, right? But yes, what didn't you enjoy? What did you absolutely love to do? And it creates this creative exercise where you're actually now starting to find your strengths and what really, really made you smile. It's really, really interesting because you answered that question differently after a layoff. Like you answered that question completely differently. So before you're like, oh, how do I best answer this question to get the job?
Right.
Now it's like, how do I best answer this question to find what fits for me? Because that thing didn't work. And so you're like, what? Yeah, so what type of, are you an early morning person, late person? Are you detailed or do you just, do you have to aim and then shoot? Or do you shoot and aim later? Like all of these things really, really matter because now if we're moving into a work environment where if you don't fit, you're kind of on the top of the list for the next layoff. Where you have to be intentional about where you go, but that intentionality kind of starts with your own self-discovery.
Wow. Yes, that's huge. So I'm just curious for you, like, What's the pre-answer? What's the post?
Oh,
What have you learned about yourself?
Well, I think for me, I'm grateful. I had the opportunity to take some time off, but
Uh-huh.
I was actually able to disconnect fully. I had a family member that I had to take care of. You have to be really, really present. And that I think really helped. And so there are folks like, hey, I've just got to go do this thing. But I think in the midst of that, I really took the time to detox, just write. Like, what happened in the last 6 months? What did I like? What didn't like? What went, did I
Mm.
see this coming? Which I did. Why did I see this coming? One of our other previous podcast guests, he talked about everything was great, but then he got laid.
Mhm.
And so sometimes the environment actually affects the experience because but I thought everything was going really well. And so in my case, it wasn't the case. A lot of tension on the team. And so I had already started to mentally, okay, something
Mhm.
could be happening here. And I talk about this in one of our previous videos where I saw some very, very talented people get laid off.
Right.
And so that I actually started the cycles for me. It's like, wow, if they could get laid off, like, oh my gosh, like they're
Mhm.
doing 10 times things that are, that are more technical, more complex. So they should have more value. Like just
Mhm.
being very, very transparent, like they should have
Mhm.
more value than what
Right.
I do for the company. And so, and every group is different. Every large company is different. But I really think that I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to process. And so I would tell folks that are listening, like, no matter how long it takes or how long you have, set
Mhm.
aside a day where you're not going to talk about, not you're going to go look for a job. Journaling is a very powerful way to do it. You just write like, okay, great. What,
Right.
happened? What did I like? What were some of what were the things on the team that I really enjoyed and other things that I didn't? And I think it really does frame the next thing that you'll go look for. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity. And I think it still continues because there's some things I see as like, whoa, I'm reacting. Like I need to go think this through
Right.
because these things, to your point around, you've invested so much time, you can't just switch it off.
Right.
And so some of the things, and even some more practical things like rejiggering my Google News feed so I see less things about work
Mhm.
and more things about the things I want to do in the future. And
Right.
so intentionally focusing forward versus focusing backward. I think that has also been very, very helpful for me. But I think I'm still in that post-morteming. And even more as I talk to people and as we do these interviews, um, like, oh my gosh, that happened to me. I didn't even think about that. So I think there's a lot of commonality in a lot of these experiences that we're all facing. And I think finding that in others is really creating this sense of bond, but also purpose that, hey, we can get through this.
Right.
And, yeah, to your point around, it does get better and there is, better tomorrow.
Yeah. Back to that grief analogy, right? It kind of reminds me of like if you have a loved one to pass away and they're terminal, you're gonna have this time to think through it, right? To imagine life without them, but if they die abruptly, let's say a car accident or something like that, and it's just out of the blue, abrupt, that can feel very traumatic, right? So the processing is different. And then sometimes you were probably kind of grieving before you even got the notice
Yeah.
in a way,
hmm
you know? So that's really interesting.
And I think this is something that a lot of folks have shared. It's quite common where it's like, so for some folks, it's sudden. We had a guest talk about, for some companies, like your badge just stops working. And so how people found out they were laid off, like you see this line in front of the door and it's like everybody's trying, like, dude, oh, I got in. Okay, I still have a job. And it, dude, oh, it doesn't
Uh,
work. Oh, I don't. And
oh
so
my.
oh yeah, so you have this line of people.
Literally, that's how they would find out? Oh,
And so again, and we'll talk about, to our leadership community, but it's it's not just the layoff, but also how it was conducted,
yes,
right? That really
absolutely.
does create a sense of permanence. This thing is like, okay, great, I will never use that product again, or very, very visceral reactions from people. But then other parts, it's like, okay, this happened. And to your point around, for some folks, they've done this processing and then done this work, and their identity is not as tightly coupled, or they've experienced a layoff before, so they're able to be more encouraging to others.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there has been a massive spectrum in how this has been handled, and the interesting thing is that they will continue. And so folks need to, your point earlier around reconciling, not necessarily preparing, but actually being in the mental wellness state so that you have the reserves bank account, so to speak. If there is this massive withdrawal, emotional withdrawal of a layoff, you can actually handle that.
Right. So I'm curious, when people get laid off, do they still get in corporate, in this tech industry, do they still get, what is the interview they call it afterwards?
Like an exit interview?
Exit interview. Do you get an exit interview when you're laid off?
That's interesting. I have not interviewed anybody that actually has had one. And it
Hmm.
may be common in other industries, but not that I don't think I've seen or heard tech interviews in tech. It's very common. Most companies that I've heard of give folks a choice, but even still, when people are reeling, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to trust that data too,
That's
because
true.
do people really share what they really want? And then there's is the company ticking a box by holding this exit interview, or are they deeply seeking feedback?
That's so true. Because sometimes
And
they
more
really
often
don't
than
care.
not, feels box ticky-ish
Mm-hmm.
rather than
I can see that.
genuinely seeking feedback. Because ultimately, at that point, the company has already set the narrative, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you are too expensive. You're a cost thing. You got to go.
Right.
Or you're a low performer. You got to go. And so at that point, the exit interview feels you've taken so much. Why am I giving you my feedback? Like, you're wasting my time,
Mm. Interesting.
right?
The
But
reason,
I do not recall being offered one. And all the folks that we've talked to across several companies, they've not mentioned that either. That's a really, really great question. Why do you ask about the exit interview?
I asked that question because it sounds like there's some room for mental health advocacy,
Interesting. Okay.
how to appropriately lay someone off. And I do feel like these companies do need feedback about the way to do that in a way that preserves dignity, doesn't just totally create shame and low self-esteem.
I love that. You're absolutely right. And I think that there is such a spectrum. I have companies that lay folks off and they're like, look, send us your resume. We will do the fighting for you. We're going to go to our best um, venture capital companies. We're going to go to our best partners, and we are going to put you in the front of the line. We have done the work to actually try and make sure that you are placed. The other companies like, yeah, we'll give you, these resume and interviewing service, but they're not high quality, so they don't audit the
Mm-hmm.
quality of the resume services and interview. So then you're like, okay, well, the service you gave me, it's not really high quality anyway, so you didn't really invest in this. It was just,
Right.
and there are other companies like, hey, thank you for your time. Your badge doesn't work as of today. Like it's a cutoff,
Wow.
type thing. So I think there's definitely room to grow. And hopefully podcasts like this can help folks listen in, because ultimately the unique thing about this audience is they are builders, and they're going to I used to build for this company, I'm going to go build it in some other company. But the primacy of mental health and being able to be healthy and whole,
Mm-hmm.
given that this is almost becoming a given at this point. So, okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
This
Uh-huh.
happened, but I can be healthy and whole, move to the next job with a whole identity, show up healthy at work, do my thing, create the magic. Some of these other topics that we're exploring on this podcast, which is,
Mhm.
do you want to go become an investor? Do you want to become a chef? Like that detox and that process is helping people identify
Mhm.
what really matters. And so I think that that's a good thing for the industry, where
Yes.
the people laying people off will get better, that it
Mhm.
invest in being more human.
Mhm.
And the folks that are being laid off, the resources being provided can be a better quality so that they can actually maximize not just the career journey, but also the mental health journey through it. Because you're so right. Many times the mental health category is often deprioritized.
That's right.
And so I think that that's, to your point, it's something that's super important.
There's something to be said in terms of thinking about your longevity of your career. There are people that I know, they can love their job, but they will still interview
Mhm.
companies, right? Because they always want to be assessing how they can be valuable to other companies, valuable to assessing value within themselves, right? Making sure they remind themselves of their own marketability. Some people, they don't like to get too lax and too comfortable in a job. They're always kind of assessing. And it makes me think about how, in general, people really, they yearn for praise and affirmation in the corporations. And that's really not the norm to get that. And so many people put themselves in a precarious predicament by waiting for that external validation of their worth. So the key is to always be assessing and commending yourself and acknowledging your own value, not
Wow,
relying
that's
on it
powerful.
externally.
So 2 last questions as we wrap. Looking at your clients who have successfully navigated career uncertainty, what wellness practices seem to have made the biggest difference for them?
Always ones that navigated the best and most successfully. They had two things in common that made them a little bit better off than those who struggled. Connection, and it relates to connection and mindset. Those who had the courage to be vulnerable, to talk about their experience with friends, family, coworkers that maybe still there, are the ones that had left, who reached out for support, they thrived. Who didn't avoid gatherings because they were afraid, what if they ask me what I'm doing now? They were vulnerable enough to show that in their own humanity, that life doesn't always go so well and okay. And part of that kind of looks at, well, how am I judging myself, right? How much do I really accept myself, and how much am I projecting that outward? That I'm embarrassed, and I'm just assuming that someone else would judge me, but that may not necessarily be the case. So connection is one, and then mindset was the second. So do you have a positive outlook on life and on what your future can look like? Did you feel like that job was the end all be all for your happiness? Or can you see other beautiful elements of yourself? Do you have hope for the future? People who were feeling hopeless, they did not do as well. The people who felt helpless did not do as well. So mindset is key. And some people aren't naturally positive thinkers. And I get it. But if you're not, you've got to find a way to change that mindset. So that might mean reading some self-help books. And I have some great ideas about some stuff people can read. Talking to people who are positive, who will uplift you. Doing positive affirmations, doing a gratitude journal. So mindset and connection, I would say, were the things that stand out from the patients that were more successful.
Oh, that's beautiful. And yes, we will pick up those book recommendations and we'll put them in the show notes for folks. Last question. What's one mental wellness practice that you recommend everyone implements, regardless of wherever they are in their career transition journeys?
I would recommend that you never stop doing the thing that you love and are passionate about. You seek adventure and a sense of zest in life through new opportunities. Always be exploring and going on the journey of self-discovery, no matter where you are on that career walk.
That is incredible and a great place to stop. Dr. DeJean, thank you. This has been amazing. I think I got so much more out of this, and I'll let our listeners know we're going to have you back for one more session. So it's super excited about that. Thank you. What you've shared today has been mind-blowing. Really, it has.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. I've enjoyed talking to you. And it's helping me to know how to navigate with my patients, hearing your personal story too.
It's interesting. There are a lot of folks that are going through this, and everyone's story is different. I've talked to folks from the same company and completely different experience. And I think it's really interesting. And as people find kind of the nuggets that can help them, hopefully that's what we want this to be, where people can actually get transformed through these stories. So thank you so much for the time, folks. This has been an amazing opportunity with Dr. DeJean. As always, we'll post these videos on YouTube and, of course, our podcast channels. So feel free to like and follow. I just have a quick note here. You can find Dr. DeJean at gapsychtreatment.com. And you can also find her on LinkedIn under Dr. Valdesha DeJean.
And may I add, I have licenses in the state of Washington, Michigan, Georgia, and Texas. So I can see patients in those states.
Thank you so much for the time. Can't wait for our next conversation. Until then, thank you so much for joining us on the Layoff Legends podcast. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye.